Hello and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. With me to do that are Kate Maltby, columnist for The Eye and chair of the Theatre Critics Circle, and Jonathan Walker, political editor at the Birmingham Mail. I'll be speaking to them in just a moment, but first a run through those front pages. The Sunday Express, let's begin there, says Brexit's big wins are coming soon. That's according to new Brexit Opportunities Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's been speaking to the paper. The Sunday Telegraph claims Russia is planning a so-called false flag attack as a pretext for an invasion of Ukraine as soon as Wednesday. The Sunday Times leads with comments from the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who's likened Western efforts to counter Russian aggression against Ukraine to appeasement before World War II. The Independent has President Biden calling on Russia to pull its troops back. Its front page also marks the occasion of Chelsea becoming football's world champions. The Sunday Mirror quotes a source as saying that murderer Levi Bellfield's alleged confession to carrying out the murders of Lynn and Megan Russell was, in the paper's words, a sick joke. And The People says a book by Prince Harry, due to be published later this year, will contain criticism of his stepmother, the Duchess of Cornwall. And The Mail on Sunday also leads with the royal family. The paper says Prince Charles and his wife Camilla plan to be crowned in a small-scale, cut-price coronation. So let's begin, and we start with the Sunday Times. This has the whiff of Munich, is the headline at the top of the front page. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace likens desperate Western efforts to prevent Russian invasion of Ukraine to appeasement. Jonathan, take us through this.
Well, the Sunday Times is reporting that that Ben Wallace, Defence Secretary, is saying that there is the whiff of Munich in the air in terms of efforts by the West basically to prevent Russia from invading Ukraine. A lot of tomorrow's newspapers are writing about the situation in Ukraine and the belief that Russia may launch some sort of invasion quite shortly. We don't know if that's going to happen. We'll have to wait and see if that comes true. But Ben Wallace is comparing the diplomatic response so far to the run-up to World War II, when, of course, the Allies allowed Adolf Hitler to annex the Sudetenland, basically to invade and take control of part of Czechoslovakia. And I think the implication is that diplomacy isn't working, and he doesn't believe it's likely to prevent conflict. It's not entirely certain from this report what he thinks should be happening instead. He seems to be referring to things that happened at some point in the past, for example, in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea. Perhaps he's arguing that the response to the West at that point wasn't good enough. But in terms of what the West can actually do today to be tougher with Russia than it is, I'm not sure that Ben Wallace makes that very clear. We do know that the US President and Emmanuel Macron and others have been speaking to Vladimir Putin today, and have issued some pretty tough warnings about the likely impact if Russia does invade Ukraine. But the fact is that the Western powers, the UK, the US and Europe, are not willing to directly get involved in this conflict. We're not willing to send troops to fight for Ukraine. And given that that's a fact, what does Ben Wallace want people to do?
Let's pick up with the Sunday Telegraph. Its lead is also Ukraine, Kate, and the headline, Russia plots false flag attack to provoke war. That was a phrase used by Jake Sullivan, President Biden's national security advisor, in that White House news conference yesterday. It's also the understanding, according to the Telegraph, of the UK government as well, that there may be a false flag, a pretext, the pretense that Ukraine has done something to start a war. Tell us a little bit more about what the Sunday Telegraph is saying, and does it address the issue of the sort of rhetoric that we're hearing from the West versus the diplomatic efforts that are happening?
Yes, well, this is a story that we've heard hints of before. I mean, I think the first talk about a potential false flag operation came with, last week or about 10 days ago, and it is extraordinary because, as many others have pointed out, secret services don't normally like to tell the world how much they know about the other countries they're monitoring, because, it reveals where your sources are. But the fact that the US and the UK have chosen to publicize this, suggests that they take it very seriously. and that they're not sure, what else other than calling Putin's bluff they can do about it. There are questions being raised about whether those of us who, don't have the resources of the Secret Service can. There are questions about whether or not we should believe this, whether we should take the US line seriously. I think it's really important to point out here that false flag operations are Putin's stock in trade. I mean, particularly within his own country. Over the course of his long regime, there have been a number of terrorist incidents, frankly, leading to the deaths of many of his own people, where there have since been quite serious questions raised about what the regime knew in advance, what the Kremlin knew in advance, and which certainly seem to have conveniently allowed the Kremlin to then impose new restrictions on the Russian people, ramp up nationalist talk. And I mean, as far as the rhetoric goes, there's an awful lot of really inflammatory rhetoric flying around. And I do think it's really important that someone says on this programme, right at the top of the hour, you had a very good report on this subject, but you had comments quite understandably from, a leading figure in the Kremlin regime who was spouting the most appalling propaganda about previous Russian incursions into Ukraine being, somehow a Russian attempt to reimpose democracy. He was talking there, or alluding to the overthrow of a Russian appeasing government at the end of 2013 and 2014 because Ukrainian people took to the streets to reject the Russian yoke. That's not the same thing as, anyone, or certainly not the West, trying to overthrow the natural democratic yearnings of the Ukrainian people to have their lives run by Russia. And I find it really sad that we're beginning to hear these kind of, straightforward Kremlin propaganda mouthpieces all over the news at the moment.
Well, Ukraine inevitably takes up many of the front pages, but actually, we're not going to the Daily Mail just yet. We are going to go back to stick with the front page of the Telegraph, in fact, on this story about the PM rolling back the state, will roll back the state and trust the people, says the headline on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. Jonathan, so as we were discussing earlier, I guess rolling back the state has the advantage for the Treasury of saving money, which clearly they want to do in government, having spent so much dealing with the pandemic. But I just wonder how the idea of rolling back the state fits with that other stated aim of the government of levelling up.
Yes, I mean, we're not quite clear how much damage COVID has done to the economy and done to the public finances, but it's pretty clear that Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, is keen to find ways to save money. Boris Johnson, by contrast, has traditionally been a spender. He enjoys spending money, and levelling up is part of this. Levelling up isn't all about slashing the cash. It's partly about devolution, devolving powers to mayors, to local authorities. But a big part of it has been big infrastructure projects, rail, roads, that sort of thing, getting money out to the North and the Midlands. And here we hear from Stephen Barclay, the MP, and Boris Johnson's new Chief of Staff, that there's going to be a return to a sort of different sort of conservatism, to restore a smaller state. And this does appear to be a bit of a change of direction for the government, if Mr Barclay is right in what he's saying. And you have to ask yourself, well, why is it happening? Is it possibly because the Prime Minister is in deep trouble, as we all know, and he's trying to shore up his position within the Conservative Party, and he needs to appeal to the side of the party, Mr Barclay's side of the party, the sort of small state Brexiteer side of the party, even though Boris himself is a Brexiteer, he's quite a different type of politician in other respects. Is he needing to win back support from Tory MPs and give them a bit of what they want, which is a bit of Thatcherism, small statism?
Kate, briefly on this one before we go on to the last story, what do you think the intent is with pushing this idea out?
Well, it's still just floating an idea, as John has said, and I agree with everything we've just heard. Boris's problem is that actually ideologically he has very little in common with the kind of Brexiteer wing. There are all kinds of people in the Tory party who support Brexit. But the majority of those in the parliamentary party are also from this very small state libertarian wing. And they expect Boris to be their champion because they agree with him on Brexit. But the spending patterns all through his premiership have been basically those of Gordon Brown. So we shall see whether he can actually realign himself. It'll be a shift.
OK, let's move on then to the Mail, which I mentioned earlier. One of the papers which has absolutely no mention of Ukraine on the front, and its lead story is revealed. It says Prince of Wales's plans for a scaled-down coronation and the moment that will cement his wife's place in history. Charles and Camilla to be crowned side by side, and then extensive coverage then inside the paper on what is called Operation Golden Orb. Jonathan, do you want to begin on this one?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time we thought that maybe Camilla would never be queen, that she would just be known as a princess. And it all goes back to the general love and affection that people held for Princess Diana, and the fear that people would never accept Camilla as queen. But it became very clear when the Queen herself said that she wished that in the fullness of time it was her sincere wish that Camilla would be Queen, that the royal family believes that this has changed. And what we're seeing in today's Mail, tomorrow's Mail on Sunday, is people talking. I mean, it's not clear exactly who the Mail on Sunday have got this story from, but clearly somebody who knows what they're talking about, who's involved in the process, is speaking to them about the coronation and sort of paving the way, in a sense, for the idea that Camilla will be Queen and that we should be used to that. And it's quite interesting that the royal family is talking and preparing for the succession. I mean, Her Majesty is 95 years old, and she clearly wants to prepare for the future, and that's what she's doing.
Kate, a word from you on this. The Mail does point out on the front page, of course, that there is no suggestion that there is anything wrong with the Queen, that she's unwell.
Yes, but we have started seeing a lot of these stories about what the future might look like for the royal family. Just earlier this week, there was also a story about how Prince Charles had realised finally that it would be right for him to live in Buckingham Palace if he became the monarch, despite, in the past it's been suggested he doesn't particularly like it. So there is a conversation happening about the next reign and the next monarch, and it's hard to ignore the fact that this is all beginning to happen as the Queen heads towards, heads over the age of 95. What I find interesting about this story, I mean, it's clearly briefed as a positive story about Prince Charles. There's lots, if you actually read the full write-up, about how progressive his vision of the coronation is, and lots about how humble he is. Whoever is briefing on his behalf is really trying to stress that he doesn't want too much pomp and ceremony. He's not going to dress up quite as much as other people have dressed up. And that is, the lines there are very clear. But there is a problem with the coronation. Sorry.
Well, if you just finish that thought very briefly.
This time round, because the House of Lords has expanded so much, and the number of life peers have expanded so much since the last coronation. I don't see that being addressed yet in the new plans.
Kate, sorry to interrupt you just as you were finishing that thought, because we are out of time. Kate Maltby from The Eye and Jonathan Walker, political editor at the Birmingham Mail. Thank you both very much for your thoughts. That's it for the papers this evening. Goodbye for now.